I'm recording this on October 7th, and I'm flying to Tennessee to lead a retreat with the Restoration Home community. I'm so excited to gather in a beautiful house with 30 Restoration Home community mamas. We're going to be drinking coffee on the porch and taking nature walks and talking about how we could be more attuned and present with our children. If you would love this kind of support and to be invited to the retreat next year, join us in the Restoration Home community. We only open 4 times a year, and this is the last time to join in 2025. When you join, you get monthly habit tracking, you get a weekly lesson, you get access to monthly calls with me and the mentor moms, where we're giving you insights into how to be more attuned and present with your children. In October, our habits are homeschool morning time, taking our supplements, and taking a daily walk. And in the online private community chat group, we have so many beautiful ideas for what supplements to take. We're not medical professionals. We're just sharing our crowdsourced mom wisdom. What to use in your morning time. Obviously, we all love the Peaceful Press. How to get your kids to go on walks, how to get them to sit still for morning time. All of the questions that you have as a homeschool mom, we're answering those in the Restoration Home community. But we only open 4 times a year. We're open for just a few more days. So don't wait. Use code Restoration10 to join today and get 10% off your yearly membership. This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about the peaceful path to connected families and restored communities. Today on the show, I'm talking to Emily Noel Jones. She's on Instagram at HomeTribeCom. You can find her online at hometribe.com. Thanks so much for joining me today, Emily.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. I'm really excited about today.
Yeah, I'm excited about our conversation. You've been really advocating for homeschooling, especially in states like California, where it's kind of this nebulous, like, yes, we allow you to homeschool. You can't go to school. You can't go to public school if you have any kind of religious or otherwise objection to vaccines. And you can't go to private school in California either. So, I haven't talked a lot about my story, but my second oldest daughter was born in the 90s, and I had to have a ROGAM shot. And at the time, they had mercury in ROGAM shots, and she was born pretty toxic. Like, she would spit up all the time, and she was kind of fussy. And then we I was in sort of a natural family. My sister was doing, the Bradley method and really, really Lamaze or no, what La Leche League. I'm like Lamaze. Yeah, she was doing the Leche League and all that. And so we were very natural minded, and we're kind of delaying vaccines because of that. But then I went to become a missionary. We were looking at joining a mission organization, and they really pressured us to get vaccines. They're like, "Don't do that. You're crazy if you go on the mission field without vaccines." So we started vaccinating our children, and there were just two at the time. So we had like a 2-year-old and a 6-month old. And the 6-month old is the one who already was born just, I mean, it seemed like there was already something kind of wrong because she was spitting up so hard, like projectile. Every time I fed her, it was like projectile. We had her tested for, there's a kind of a milk allergy thing that babies can get. So anyhow, we go ahead, we give her the vaccines, and then she's even a little more fussy and sensitive. And, with the course of her life, she's had seizures, she's had really bad scoliosis, she's had articulation difficulties, she's diagnosed with an intellectual disability, but she's like super smart. She reads, Henty and Sir Walter Scott, like just an amazing person, but also these pretty debilitating disabilities. And so I have a hard time letting anybody tell me what's good for my kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't know my kids, you don't know my genetics, you don't know our family. And so I have a really hard time with a state making a blanket statement about what is good for your kids, or even the whole, pediatrics association, whatever. Like, I want somebody who knows my kids and what's going on with us to give more specific. So that's one of the reasons why home tribe is kind of a big deal right now, because so many parents in California, if you have a child who's a little bit, ill on the spectrum, needs some extra help, maybe you suspect that there's been a vaccine injury, you have no options here. Like, you cannot private school your kids, which is a crazy, crazy overstepping of the religion, this, state and church separation rules. But you can't put your kids in private schools here, and you can't put them in public schools. And so in California, homeschooling is like the only option. And what people end up doing then is getting a little bit creative. Like, there are charter schools of all shapes and sizes. There are, co-ops and just all kinds of different ways that people in California are trying to get around these Orwellian vaccine rules. And to add to that, California actually does have the highest autism rates in the nation, much higher than other states. So, Emily, tell me a little bit about how you got started with what you're doing, because I think your story is probably a little similar.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you bring up vaccines first and foremost on this talk because I started the home tribe community way back in 2014 when there was SB 276 rolling out that would or it actually revoked our religious freedoms in California. So that's where I saw that there was a huge problem with me and my two little boys. My boys, I think, were like 2 and 3 at the time, and I have a background in user experience and user interface design, and I was working, dipping my toe into tech back then. So when I saw that there were educators and parents who were really concerned about this bill, we started getting together, and I launched a prototype that just simply connected us together in our communities. And we were doing just early learning experiences and education in a different way. It was very different from what everyone was doing. Everyone was either in public school or traditional private school. And we were forming co-ops and doing homeschool, and homeschoolers at that point, I was living in Santa Cruz County, were like the freaks. So we were doing something that was pretty fringe, and we did it for a couple of years. I put it down and we moved to a more conservative area. I'm in Redding, California. And so so that we could have more options with public education. And I was, seeing such a myriad of issues in public education, even when we switched them over, even though the schools, are better here, up here in Shasta County. But when 2020 hit, that was when really the lid blew off public education, and we got an inside view as parents as to what was going on and how these educators were educating and approaching education. It was just such a horrible mess in 2020, and that is really when the huge exodus happened in public education. And that's when I relaunched the prototype. We launched the app around 2021, and we've just been reiterating this platform. But we do a lot of advocacy work. So early on in 2021, when we were relaunching this platform, we were doing a lot of homeschool 101 nights and just teaching people in our community the ABCs and the one, two, threes of homeschool, because they knew they wanted to leave. They just didn't know that homeschool was as much of an option as it is now. Homeschool is so mainstream now, but we really like to make sure that we are at the forefront of advocacy and policy. We go down to the Capitol a lot to make sure that we are lobbying these bad bills and holding the line for California, because it's such a battleground for education. So yeah, that's really the genesis of Home Tribe, and really how it came to be, because we want to make sure that we are preserving parental rights and freedoms through this platform, and then connecting people in the community for those different options, and also community of friendships. That's really important to us.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about the exodus in 2020, because I think a lot of people started homeschooling in 2020 just because they saw, oh my gosh, like, if the schools did close, and I know not every state closed their schools, but quite a few did, at least for some time. And so I think a lot of parents saw, oh wow, this is what they're doing. Like, we could do this at home and have a lot more fun. And my sister is she's on the school board for another county in California. And she said that a lot of the public schools, the kids are just on computers all day. Like, they're not even being taught in, study groups or through hands-on learning. It's all just on a computer. And if you're going to do that, you definitely should just homeschool. Like, why would you send your kid to this cold, sterile, germ infested environment? Like, I'm not a homeschool purist. I love homeschooling. I've homeschooled my children for 27 years. My youngest, though, is in high school and he's enrolled in a California charter school because we had a busy year. My husband and I were doing some missionary training. And so we let him go to the charter school so that he could get, lab science. That's really important to us in high school, and a really good math teacher. Those two things I know that I'm not good at in high school. And I wanted my son to have a great education. And so I'm okay, like, in the restoration home community on the podcast, there are lots of different ways that people are educating, and homeschool isn't the only way. But if you have a choice between, teaching your children about the Lord or having them sit on a computer in a sterile, godless classroom, I would think that it's not that hard of a choice, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with this new wave of not only homeschoolers and homeschool parents, education really is revolutionizing, and it's not a one size fits all model anymore. And so we're really breaking that mold and we're decentralizing education. And, due to the fact that 2020 really tore, tech apart, it tore the corporate world apart, and it also forced parents to be at home with their children more, but it also made them realize, hey, I don't know if I have to work this 9 to 5. And if I don't have to work this 9 to 5, I don't know if my kids have to be in school all the time. I know that they need to be in some type of education program, but we're seeing a lot of hybrid models pop up. We're seeing a lot of, distance education while families are traveling and they're, working remote. We have this like huge world schooling community that's really emerging now more than ever. So yeah, I'm really on the side of what works for your family and what works for your child, because not every child thrives in, a homeschool setting or a more unstructured setting or a streamlined setting. My One of my sons, he thrives in a very rigid structured setting, and that was really hard for me to understand, like, why do you want to sit in a desk? But he actually does, and he's at a small charter here, and so I'm a huge advocate for the charters, and just, putting family first, whatever that looks like for your family, is what I advocate for and what we advocate for at Home Tribe.
Yeah, I love that. And what do you think? Because California, in a way, is in the front of some movements. Like, I don't like a lot of the things about California. And, so many of my listeners are in more sort of conservative states like Tennessee or Missouri. But the same people who are educating Californians are educating the rest of the country. And the tech companies that are influencing California are influencing the rest of the country. So, what are some of the good and bad sort of, like, cultural shifts that you see coming down the line, especially because you're having conversations with some really interesting people?
Yeah, I think there's always pros and cons to this new emergence of AI. I think at the beginning, more like 2023, when I was working with a lot of clients, everyone wanted to jump on this AI bandwagon and provide this virtual atmosphere for kids and, get into, um, you know, uh, streamlining AI, but there are dangers to that. We actually have we're launching a conference in 3 weeks, and Victor Cho, he's a former CEO of Evite, and he's the current CEO of Emovid, but he is going to speak on the potential downsides of AI and how we can combat that and approach AI for our next generation, because it's something that we have to have. We have to have our learners understand that this is going to be needed in the future for the future of work. But we also have to be aware as parents right now, educating our kids how to use it as a tool, and a tool only, and not let it overtake our education, or overtake our worlds, because we want to make sure that we're the ones in the driver's seat for that. And I think that's just a good rule of thumb for any type of technology. And I'm always on the side of real world experiences. Home Tribe, the community, yes, it's a platform, but we want you to connect on the platform and then meet off on the platform for these programs. So that's why I see the biggest culture shift is AI and how unregulated AI is. But also in California, you made a good point that we're always the leader when it comes to policy, which is unfortunate because we are always having to go down to the Capitol and battle these bad bills. So we have so many amazing advocates in California that fight every single day and make us aware of these bills, and also do the work. They're doing the nitty gritty work, going down and meeting with legislators and making sure that we are all calling and voting. So as long as we can cap that and make sure we are on the forefront of them trying to gut and amend or them trying to pass these bills, I think that we can certainly hold the line for California so that we have, as many options as the other more conservative states that you talked about.
Yeah, that's amazing that you are, keeping track of that because it is true. California passed that bad bill about the vaccine mandates, and then some other states also passed some really bad bills like that. And I know, I think I don't know what all the cultural problems that come from, for instance, legalizing marijuana or sort of almost in California, we almost finance homelessness. Like instead of ending homelessness, we actually sort of perpetuate it. So there's a lot of really intense social ills that are happening here, but the laws and sort of even the mindsets that are influencing that are influencing other states as well. And being kind of aware of that is important. But also, in the restoration home community, we're all about hope and taking care of our families and creating a better world, partly just through being better people and, raising our children for the Lord. But do you see any hope for culture? Like some of the things you're seeing are such a bummer. Do you see any hope for culture?
I saw a lot of hope. It was getting pretty dark with AB 495 in California, and that really sent people into a huge state of fear. But there's always a flip side to the fear. And I think, had AB 495 passed, which it didn't, thank God, and had AB 84, which would have decimated these non classroom based charter schools and the vendors, which would really impacted homeschoolers. Had those had passed, that would have been bad. But the amazing thing is that we fought so hard that they didn't pass. And so I have a lot of hope for our community and how we band together and just do what needs to be done. But I think that we're resilient in a way that, again, if those were passed, we are so creative in our approach to education now, and there's so many different ways that we can approach education. And California, if you're not going to a public school, you still can opt in, to homeschool. You can do the what is it called?
The
As a
private
home
school
like,
affidavits.
yeah, with a PSA, you're non-exempt and everyone's always like, "Oh, that could, go good or go bad," but we still have a lot of freedom here, and I think there's a lot of creativity about these programs that are popping up that are kind of meeting parents where they're at, where they do need maybe a couple days a week for their kids to go into a program so they can work, but then, those other 2 days they can be home with the kids and have a flex learning environment. So I'm always on the hopeful side, and I'm a Christian and I'm seeing such an emergence of, a different type of approach to Christian education, whether that be, homeschool or these really cool, nature and Christian programs popping up. So yeah, I think that the future is more bright than ever. I just think that we always have to have our, finger on the trigger when it comes to advocacy and policy.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about the creativity because that is one thing I feel living on the West Coast. I think, the listeners on the West Coast can relate to this and probably living in some of the states like Colorado, New York, some of these states that are a little bit more morally corrupt. We have to be even a brighter light in some ways. And I wish for my kids' sake, I wish that Christian culture was a little less polluted because I feel like the problem is, if you're in a Bible Belt where there's still a cultural influence that says, no, you shouldn't, yes, you should go to church every Sunday. No, you shouldn't shack up with your boyfriend. There's a lot of cultural, in some ways, compromises I feel like that happen even in Christian culture in states that were being pushed on so hard. But I do also love the way that it sort of binds you together and causes you to be a little bit more you can't be relaxed about it here. Do you know what I mean? Like we know that we are the minority in some sense. In California, we know that, there is a decently evil cultural influence happening in terms of some of the ways that they're pushing against just normal traditional Christian values. And yet being a light in a dark culture, I think sometimes refines you in a way that living somewhere where you sort of take for granted that everybody's doing the traditional Christian thing changes your perspective a little bit. And I think probably makes you a little more gritty.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're always caught in the crossfires here in California because, we're a blue state, and so but it's interesting because we're a blue state, it's surprising when you see so many people stand up for, I call it, right and wrong, good and evil, right? Because many people are like, I'm not even a Christian. This is crazy. This is insane. Like, we can't have these books here. We can't be passing these laws to, stifle our freedoms as parents. So I think it's great that even people of all religions are coming together and just seeing evil for what evil is. Because that's the battle. The battle is, for our souls. And we saw such evil with the whole assassination of Charlie Kirk, and it was such a dark time. But with that evil again, came the light. I don't know if you watched the memorial, but every single person that got up to that pulpit, they spoke of Christ as their savior, and that was just a monumental shift, I think, like, as a culture, not just California. And it was the darkest time, and the gospel came out of the darkest time. So I feel like we are shifting in a more Christian path. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, my book Habits for a Sacred Home is all about how we, just like Saint Benedict and the people who were surviving after the dark ages or after the fall of Rome, that we are in a sense witnessing the fall of a civilization. And yet if we return to Christian practices and a Christian rule of life, we can in so many ways preserve culture, at least until the Lord comes back, because the Christian values that built Western civilization are still relevant today. And one of the things I'm actually kind of passionate about is noticing Marxist ideology when it comes at you, because so many Christians, we have soft hearts. Like, I was a missionary in Mexico. I care about immigrants. I care about the fact that the petrodollar means we get to live a lot nicer than the rest of the world does. I care about war. Like, I lean right, but there were there were Republican presidents I didn't vote for because they're warmongers. So some of my values are, would have at the time been more moderate or something. But when you see people like advocating for the mutilation of a child's body in the pursuit of some confusion they're dealing with as a teen. Like, teenagers don't know their own minds. Like, that's a confusing time in your life. And to let a child do something that's irreparable and to have a state stand up for that, like that, there's a certain real grief in living in a state that is paying for children to mutilate their bodies before they're even old enough to make a decision like that, or paying for women to kill their own babies in their womb, and the pain of that. Like, some of these things that seem to some people like the compassionate choice that Democrats are voting for are actually pretty destructive to humanity. Like, abortion is destructive to women. Mutilating your body in the name of transgenderism is destructive to your soul. It's an absolute rejection of your design. And so it is hard because sometimes people who seem compassionate actually aren't thinking through their compassionate choices. And so, I think that's where maybe we just need a little bit more of a return to like just traditional values and traditional understanding of the world, and maybe even listening to older people, because sometimes we're just so influenced by culture and social media that I think it's even hard for Christians to tell right from wrong. And it's sad to say this, but I've seen so many famous Christian authors then advocate for lifestyles that are anti-biblical, and it's just hard to understand except in the lens of compassion that is off base.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's so important to look at these pervasive issues through the lens of communism and Marxism, and to do the research. I was interviewing someone named Seek Smith. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but her family came from Cambodia, and the first thing they did was separate the families and make the wives and husbands and children gender neutral, so that the family unit cracked open and they didn't have the identity. And they're doing that at different angles, that they're indoctrinating our kids in public education, They're inverting their cultural values and telling them that, you can become a boy or you can become a girl. We're seeing it in the curriculum. But it's always an attack at the family at the core of, Marxist ideology. And I've heard from several leaders that we're already in World War III. It's the world and the battle for our minds and for our younger generation's minds, because their minds have been infected, and we're seeing that play out, now more than ever. So yeah, I think it's always important to understand what went wrong in other countries so that we don't lose our constitution here and our freedoms here. And RFK talked about this. I don't know if you saw his speech, but Charlie Kirk asked RFK, how do you reconcile with death? Are you afraid of death? And RFK replied, there's worse things than death, and that's if we lose our constitution and if our children become slaves. And I totally agree with him on that.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder because some of these ideas, they do come very innocently, like, caring about the poor, caring about people in crisis. And this is one of my big reasons for homeschooling, aside from wanting my children to know the Lord, is protecting them from that like nihilistic victim narrative that everybody is a either a perpetrator or victim, that you can't get out of a victim state. So I this is such a good conversation, Emily. And yeah, if you're listening and you are in in California especially, but even any of the states surrounding California, on October 25th, there's going to be the Home Tribe conference in Redding, California. And you can find the link in profile to register for that. And you can find Emily on Home Tribe Com on Instagram. Any final thoughts, Emily, you'd love to share?
Yeah, no, I'm feeling super blessed that you're going to be coming and keynoting. And I think you have such, depth, and you are just providing such an amazing platform. So I'm really excited to sit in actually and watch you speak, and how you serve the community. But yeah, I'm just really thankful to be, on this podcast, and I'm thankful to be plugging into everything that you're doing for the community as well.